This is the Shade Tree Commission meeting of December 6, 2007, and call the meeting to order. Our first order of business is tree permits and right-of-way issues, and I can report that the tree plantings have been almost completed. 13 out of the 14 trees have been planted, and there was an orphan tree which it was not possible to plant in the site it was destined for, but there was a site right next door at the Factory Street Studio at 37 Ohio. And so the October Glory Red Maple will go just maybe 30 feet from where it was originally intended. And that was $3,750 for those 14 trees planted and mulched. And they're handsome big things. Let's see, there is a need now for us to give tree care directions to about a dozen folks, and we had hoped to have a one-page thing that we can hand to them. We're going to simply plagiarize from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources with something about mulching and watering in times of dry weather, and we'll be working on that. Emily and I are going to work on that later on. So we'll get that out to the people who have the trees. And then there's one last tree permit item. We issued a tree permit to College Park Condos at 247 West Union, I think it is, for the removal of the ash trees that were damaged by the tree service that they hired. The tree service cut off every limb below the point where there were leaves, and there were perhaps 27 leaves left on one of the two ash trees, and Ann Bonner described those as being ruined. So those trees need to come out. I talked with the manager of College Park Condos, and they want to do this in the spring. I encouraged them to take advantage of the Christmas break to remove the trees, and left a message also with the chairman of the board of the College Park Condos. So I'd just say stay tuned on that, but we may need to do something else come spring if that doesn't happen. Next item, let's see, is Tree City USA application. Ron Lucas submitted that for us, and does a really professional job of gathering data. So he's not here tonight, but he got that in, and greatly appreciated. Serious work that keeps us, let's see, this is our 16th or 17th year of being a Tree City USA, and this was a necessary application to continue that. Landscape ordinance issues. We need a little bit of information if it's available. Steve, do you have any information?
My name's Steve Pierce. I'm the Zoning Administrator and Director of Code Enforcement for the City of Athens, Ohio. As it relates to Bennigan's, I've sent, see if I can find the right one here. RSB Enterprises, attention Mr. Rick Rose, a order to comply, which is the next step after this is citation into court if they don't comply. It also has zoning violations that are related to that. So what I've got here, these are just copies of the most recent letter.
Okay.
And I sent it to him with other correspondence attached, so you'll have the running record.
Attach that to our minutes.
On all of that.
Yeah.
For Taco Bell, I give you 2 copies of each one. So letter I sent to Lawn Masters and More and asked them, I would help them because I have a copy of the plat. We can draw the property lines in, and they can indicate the trees and where the screening needs to go. So, and I wanted to do that in writing rather than correspondence Mr. Brandon had with me, just on the telephone, expressing his concern. So it basically just says, here's what you're required to do. I think there was a letter, the letter I sent to him had your letter of recommendation attached to it also.
Okay.
For other issues, here's a correction letter. It's a correction letter that I sent to Mr. Clayton Pitcher, who represented Altel, SiteQuest, for the Colorado blue spruce that never did appear, and whatever did appear was very short and died. So here's a letter that went to him. I'd started working on the letter to Les Cornwell, Carpenter Street Planned Unit Development, and I knew somewhere I had a copy of the minutes of the meeting about what needed to be planted and maybe some conversation about the large stone that was there.
Yeah.
Ms. McWilliams sent me a drawing that I seemed not to have had that Ann Bonner had done. So now that I have this information, I've got the Planning Commission case file out at the office, and I'll take this, Ann's letter, and the drawing, then and do up a similar letter to that, a correction letter. So I don't know if you need this or not. We've got going so far on
Probably.
that.
Yeah, I have that in my email, I think, yeah. So that should probably just attach to the minutes.
And
Compendious.
I started thinking tonight, there's probably many more places that, and I have a couple in mind, where I know that the trees have died. I'm thinking particularly of the corner of Stewart and Mill Street. So I'll just go back through the file, see which place, go back out, especially, now I can check to see what's there, what isn't, and just continue with all these correction letters. Most people are very good about complying. We were having this conversation before the meeting. It's that small group of people that takes all the time and all the attention. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And so
Well, thank
that's
you
what I've
very
been working on most recently, and I've got 2 or 3 others in mind, and went out there ready to do the letter tomorrow.
Thank you very much. This is the Bennigans and the Taco Bell ones. I do get comment. People wonder what's going on there or what's not going on there.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to express a little more about the flower planters, but I refrained from that. Taco Bell, I just said they didn't comply. I mean, at Bennigan's, they just didn't comply.
No.
I had to restrain myself a little bit.
It was an
So
interesting effort.
They were trying to, they thought somehow having those were in compliance or helped them come into compliance?
evidently, the
Perennials or annuals?
yeah.
Sorry.
The original letter I had sent was, part of it was landscaping, part of it was zoning violation. And I do have a little more legal horsepower on the zoning violations. There's a lot of things out there still that there are loose ends that need to be tied up.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Greatly appreciate it. Does anybody have questions? I saw, Emily, you were making notes about. No. Okay.
Yeah, any other ones in particular that you might note? I know, for example, we talked about out the Hampton Inn. And if you could, say, just email me and let me know where to look at on the plans and go to the site and what trees are missing, I can do exactly the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Greatly appreciated. There is a recommendation that came from David going to a neighborhood association meeting, I think, that had to do with this kind of landscape ordinance review process. And I've tucked this into the landscape ordinance issues that we might consider following a procedure that the Zoning Board of Appeals does when it has findings to quantify or have a list of things that we really are looking for that either happen or don't happen. And so I've tried to print something out that the Zoning Board of Appeals goes by, and Paul, you must know that by heart from having been on that board. But my, well, I'll pass this out just for entertainment purposes to see what a person with a Macintosh can do. And then I encourage you to go on your own computers and look at this section of the code, which is Athens City Code 230709. And you can find that at the City of Athens site. on the law director's page at the top where there's the Athens City Code. And I will try to print this in a better form next time, but
It looks like you probably cut and pasted the PDF file, was that it?
yeah, good sleuthing, yeah.
Oh, no, it does the same thing. It takes all the E's and turns them into C's and various other letters.
Yeah,
It
so
makes it very, you know.
that's true. If you want to try your code
Interesting.
breaking skills, here's a chance. But if you really want to read it immediately, go look at the City of Athens Law Director's page, and then under the code at the top of his page, and I will produce a version of this, and maybe we can start putting together a list that will keep the review process a bit more tidy. Steve, you probably have ideas on that.
I'm not sure what section that you printed out, but is it the board's 6 findings?
Yes.
Yes,
six
six
findings.
findings.
What's happened in the past is appellants were asked to address each of those, and kind of the way the average person thinks and the process the zoning board has to go through don't necessarily, you may think you're substantiating your point, but you may be saying something that's really a detriment to your point.
Yeah.
So what the zoning board has done, and the code reflects, is in the 2005 revisions, the page before that, there's a section that the appellant has a series of questions that they have to answer. In other words, trying to take the average person's point of view done in a narrative form, and then the board takes that and tries to use it to review the 6 findings that they have to go through. So they're trying to make it more common for the average person to express what they think the problem is. So there's a series of questions. There's about a dozen questions that each appellant has to answer. So you might want to look at that too. It's just the page before.
Yeah.
That's,
Okay, that's-
2708, 270708. It's
Yeah.
where it covers the application and standards of variance.
And appellants seem to, they feel better doing it kind of in a narrative form, expressing themselves. What do they think the particular hardship, practical difficulty is? Are you granting them any special favor other than, are you making them do something somebody else doesn't have to do? And it makes it a little more comfortable, I think, for an appellant to do it that way.
Is there any reason that you know of as to why it appears in the zoning code and not just in the procedures of the zoning board of appeal?
Have no idea.
Because that was a question in my mind. When the West Side people raised this issue, it was in the context of this statement: if the specific application of the landscape requirements will seriously limit function to the site, the Shade Tree Commission shall have authority to limit consolidation and/or relocation. They felt that wasn't specific enough. And I wasn't sure whether we needed to actually put anything more specific in there, like this language that's in the zoning, or whether we should put it in our procedures that this is what we'll do.
There may be some legal reason for that, because I know, for example, there's a case at Common Pleas Court right now, and a lot of what the court will look at is, did you properly follow your procedures? And it has to be outlined then in the law what those procedures are. I don't know, unless you had a section maybe that said policies and procedures have the same effect as law, that you could, get away with that. I think what you're looking for is if it's appealed any further, or if somebody wants to know what is the process you go through initially, they know just exactly, I'm saying, what it is. So everybody that comes in knows that they're going to be asked the same questions in the same manner, in the same process. It's very important, I know, for the zoning board to go through their findings, each and every one of them, and answer, actually verbalize the answer, because that's part of the record in case there's, some challenge later on. I mean, the courts just go straight by the transcript and straight by the law.
Anyway, that's what the context is for this thing that Albie just mentioned. The West Side people pointed out that might be a better way to go, rather than just say seriously limit function.
Yeah.
But I'm open. I'll certainly read this section now I know where it is.
Yeah.
And, I'll have a look at it and see how difficult it would be to incorporate something similar to that.
And really, if you...
Because there is actually another issue that pops up. For some reason, I don't understand why. The current version, we're not proposing to change it yet, But if you want to have a look at 37.
Yeah, we're moving on to the next one, so
Yeah, we're actually
there we're in it.
We're in the middle
We're
of
in
the
it.
cycle, so have a look, see what we're talking about. If you turn to the last but one page, it's 37. The 08 now is crossed out because this will become 09. At the bottom of the page, it's got commercial, institutional, industrial landscaping. For some reason, down here, it talks about this section shall apply to all new developments, blah, 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 and so on. And it's in here that you get the statement, in the case of pavement replacement, existing building alteration, the minimum number of parking spaces required to be used shall not be reduced. And so there you're seeing, something which is now being addressed earlier in here. When we talk about it's a specific application of landscape ordinance will serious limit function. And so there's a bit of a question in my mind as to why we have these two separate parts. Now, it may be easier for us to operate with those two separate parts like that, but I don't know. So I don't know whether that was tacked on by council when this was first passed, because this section is not one that we're changing other than cease and deletions and some additions being put in there. But that piece about the 25% alterations and so on has been there all along.
Okay, you're talking about the section that the series limits functions number E, is letter E of 3203, general?
Yeah, there's that, and then
37.
under 3709, we've got commercial, institutional, industrial landscaping. We have this thing where it says this section shall apply. And I'm not sure what it means by this section. I don't know whether, is that 3709 that shall apply? Or is it just A that applies? What's the section in the code?
Well, we need to be a
Usually
little
it
more
is the,
specific.
Well, usually the whole chapter is the title, and the section, I assume, is the 09 section.
So it would have been clearer, this section, comma, 3709 shall apply.
Well, but no, maybe it's understood legally that everything in 3709 is a section. Anyway, that you can see where we can run into some difficulties, because we don't want different parts of the ordinance to conflict. I don't think they do. But if we start saying things about what people have got to do to overcome these landscape requirements that might seriously limit function, then we don't want to run into a conflict later. But I will look at that.
Yeah.
A lot of times in a residential setting, people are tearing up all their asphalt or adding parking, and that section always comes to mind for me. And then I look at it, excuse me, and it applies to commercial, institutional, and industrial only. It's not a reference to residential. So I find myself always wanting to say, oh yeah, there's a retrofit requirement because you're improving your home, adding to your home, changing your pavement, but that section only applies to non-residential.
So that may be why it says that
Exactly.
phrase, this section shall apply to.
Yeah,
Okay.
if it sent you all the way back and included residential, then that would cover also residential.
Yeah.
But the header doesn't have that in it.
Yeah. Because the other thing that's in here is this piece about the 8-foot wide strip adjacent to the right of way and how we can allow people to use the right of way if necessary. So,
Because in a residential setting, it's a great opportunity if somebody's replacing their driveway to get that 4-foot buffer between their driveway and the neighbor. And,
so that,
I have trouble
that may
applying
explain
it.
why it's there and what it's doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're going to do some kind of system-like findings, I don't think you can be as exacting as the zoning board of appeals. I'm trying to think of actually the zoning board of appeals. Does that actually refer to Ohio Revised Code? It's actually set up in the Ohio Revised Code, I think.
It might be in the revised code, it says you have to go through that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, is that's why they have those findings in that statement there.
Yeah.
If you're going to try putting something like that in, you really should be going back and looking at the intents and say, okay, what are we trying, what are the considerations? Is it just, one of the things you see in the zoning board of appeals regularly, somebody says, well, I need to do this because I'll save a buck. And well, that's it, it's fiscally I need to do this because it's not cost effective, and that does not wash with the zoning board of appeals. That's not in the findings per se, it's just,
Yeah.
so.
Well, I think that was what the West Side people were getting at, was how will that be interpreted by future tree commissions? As, what does it mean to seriously limit the function? Is cost simply insufficient to seriously limit a function, or is it the space that's available to seriously limit the function?
And eventually you'd want to go back to the intent of which is what you're trying to do, which is trying to get a certain percentage of tree coverage, in the city. And that's where you'd have to, that's also a function there. And I think part of it is just, you can't supersede some of the parking requirements, but the idea is to be able to work around them in that sense.
Yeah. Well, this might very well be more of a policies and procedures possibility.
Yeah.
Can we run through
Yes.
the other changes that I've put in here? Since you last saw this, we now have definitions appearing. They are simply in alphabetical order, and I'm not convinced that that's the best way to put the definitions in this case, because it means that impermeable appears before permeable. I can define permeable, I think, but I have to define impermeable as the opposite. So that's it sort of makes it appear a little illogical when you lay it out that way. Topography, I think that's what's meant by topography. And view shed, that was an adaptation from the version that you, I think, found on the
Yeah,
web.
and Ann Bonner
Ann Bonner, okay.
provided the same thing.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a that is, as I say, an adaptation of what's available on the web for a view shed.
Okay, so that's the new section.
It would be a new section. The law director felt that we needed some definitions that pertain particularly to this title.
Okay.
And I think we should ask Anne about the one about the permeable surface, if that's sufficient in her. I think it could be worded a little bit better, but what I felt we had to do was make it clear that we're talking about some space, volume of material that's capable of absorbing enough water and having the ability then to sustain a tree in it. Because we've seen examples in Cincinnati of these very large tree coffins where they appear to be able to sustain trees in what you might not think of immediately as a permeable space.
But it's not, please correct me if I'm wrong, it's not the paving which is absorbing the water. Isn't the paving allowing the water to percolate to the substrate which absorbs the water? Or is it...
What we're talking about here is what we mean by permeable surface when we're talking about where these trees will be planted. They will be planted in a permeable surface.
So this is the soil and the mulch and the
So we're not talking about the special...
Oh, so you're not talking
materials.
about permeable paving,
No.
you're talking about permeable, oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
surface,
Yeah.
right, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
David, aren't we wanting to decrease the runoff as well as having the water used for shade trees?
Yep.
Should that be mentioned here?
No, because that would have to be mentioned in the design
Okay.
standards of the parking lot itself, and that's where we need to get Andy Stone to work with us to
Okay.
see if we can write that better. But that will be a separate part of the zoning code.
In a definition, would you want to put an example, like soil or something?
Yeah.
I'm just asking.
That does get to the point, such as.
No, I'm just asking if you want examples.
I'll think about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wondering.
No, you see, well, in that context, Anna's mentioned some engineered soils
Yes.
that people use for these things, and so it doesn't have to be, the
Well,
stuff-
as an
stuff
example,
that's-
we don't have to say it only has to be soil. I guess.
But it could be stone. Pebbles.
Mixed with enough nutrients and other
Right, so you can
medium
have stone
that
on
will
top,
allow
and
to-
it could be a layered.
Yeah.
Yeah, the green roofs, you know,
Yeah.
they use engineered soils that are expanded shales and with some mineral additions to them. And so would you call that soil? Not in the normal sense, but
Permeable.
it's permeable. what I was meaning is that stone, just stone, nothing else, still allows water to penetrate and absorb for the growth of a large shade tree.
Yeah, but it has
But
to be
doesn't
enough-
produce any food, so to speak, other than the water.
Well, it doesn't really absorb it.
No.
Stone would not be absorbent.
So stone would not
It wouldn't
fit this definition?
No,
Would it be a
Right.
surface?
because you couldn't sustain the tree in it.
No, but if you had.
It could be part of
Right,
the,
right.
Yeah.
You could have stone on the top layer and then different material below. Hopefully in there
Well, I can
somewhere.
see people
See, growth
thinking that stone
Yeah,
is allowing
sure,
water
right.
to get to the roots of a tree and that it complies. That's
Well,
what I can see.
that's why it said it had to absorb and the water
Okay.
without the growth. But, yeah, you know, it's this is one of the details that you don't like to get into when you're writing these
Yeah,
definitions.
true. Because if you think about just using the definition of stone, we have the parking lot we were just talking about, the Cornwall parking lot that has stone, and that technically is a permeable surface, but you know, is it helpful for trees, and does it really? It's just it's not even a surface. It's,
Well,
the next one is what's a mulch versus a layer of stone and gravel too.
well, then an example might be useful. An example is earth, which does allow water to penetrate and absorb. Stone would not be, because even though it allows water to get to the roots, it's not absorbent. And those would be the two main things that I would think of.
Yeah, and it is clear that a businessman already did think of rocks as a,
Yeah,
as a possibility.
everybody
So-
that I know would think of rocks as being acceptable.
Yeah.
So-
Medium capable of promoting plant life.
I was going to say something like growth medium, yeah.
Yeah, growth medium has
Anyway, I'm sure
That's
there's a
shorter.
way to get it more
Of course,
complex.
I'm thinking when growth medium, I'm usually thinking of Arger, but, you know, that,
Okay, so obviously that needs a little bit more work. We've looked at me on the next page when we deal with the seriously. We go to 37, which is now the 06, buffering landscape. So that, 1, 2, 3, fifth page. I think we may want to change number 4 in D. To just have between residential properties. The West Side people, again, in discussions with them, it seemed that that's going to be a bit difficult thing to really define and make work. And as far as I'm concerned, if you had one residential property at which there was a large parking lot and another one where there were children and a family, they would probably want buffering between those two
Right,
areas.
yeah,
And therefore the person who put the parking in there might well be required to put in some buffering. So I think, bearing in mind what it says ahead of this section, a decorative fence or screening or such additional shrubs, hedges, fences and or walls shall be provided for the purpose of obscuring objectionable features or attractive nuisances, such as parking lots and cycling rear entrances, utility or maintenance structure, loading facilities, swimming pools and recreational areas. And then we go through a list. And I think it would be easier just to delete from 4 to the end of that sentence. So number 4 just reads between residential properties. That way I think we've covered everything.
Is that,
so in other words, there would, between residential properties, so that between everybody's house, there has to be screening then?
If
Uh-huh,
the condition above is met.
okay,
Right? The condition being there's an objectionable feature or
Oh,
attractive
okay.
nuisance.
okay.
That's I'm trying to think of. I can think of lots of examples of attractive nuisances or objectionable features
Yes,
next door.
That's fine. Yeah.
But somebody else may not. I mean,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
But remember that this is only going to apply when a property is being developed.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, we're not
Yeah.
going back in and
Okay,
redoing the entire west side,
I know.
putting up hedges and fences everywhere.
I assume you're going to send, Steve, you've seen this already, or no?
No, he hasn't.
Okay.
He sees the earlier versions. We
I'm
haven't
just
seen them.
imagining, though, the guy saying, I don't want to see your driveway and car. So you need shrubs right there.
Mhm.
So every driveway is going to be lined with a screening of some type.
If the neighbor's complaining.
If it's being
Then it's
built.
too late, though.
It's too late.
Yeah.
Right,
No,
that's
no.
right.
What may happen is
Ah.
and I thought about this in the context, say, of the was it High Point Villas, where we had the design of those 4 driveways on that enormous great stretch.
Mhm.
You know, anyone looking at this might well then have to think, well, now I'm going to have to put some buffering between each one of those driveways.
Mm.
And that, I think, is what we intended them to do. And we didn't find it possible under the old landscape ordinance, and I'm not sure we'll absolutely do it under this one.
So if the neighbor considers the view of the car and the parking area an objectionable feature, that's good enough?
Remember, this only happens when you're building a new property or
Right.
changing its use.
Right.
And there's the get out that a written request received from the owners of the abutting residential district property that the screening is required herein shall be waived or varied based on stated purpose. In other words, you can get the neighbours to agree, we don't want a buffer. So they don't have to do it if the neighbours decide they don't want it done.
So, and within the 5 years, so that gives them a chance to practice whether or not it's something's objectionable. It says something within 5 years.
No, that's to do with the
The
choice of shrubs to go around
Garbage
things
containers.
that have to be screened, like the trash collection areas.
Oh,
The
okay.
expectation is that they will be mature within 5 years of planting.
If
Okay, got it.
somebody were to buy 4 properties in a row and develop it, and then put in parking lots behind, since he's the adjacent property owner and decides that it's okay not to have a buffer.
I guess.
But he'd have to have buffers on the outside,
Oh,
on
yeah.
the
Yep.
Unless, of course, he could persuade his neighbors that he doesn't need them, or they don't mind.
But I'm thinking of the cases that have occurred in areas like Mill Street, where entire
The whole
areas have been
strip.
turned into a parking
Parking
lot,
area.
and there's been no requirement for buffering at that point.
Well, now, would this extend to driveways near the front of the lot where the buffering material might tend to obstruct traffic view?
No, because there are, it's either in here or elsewhere in the code. It says you can't obstruct the sight of the street
Okay.
and so on. And also driveways, I don't think are covered by this because it's talking about, it gives a list of possible things, and parking
Okay.
lots are included, but driveways aren't included.
Well, someone raised that.
Yeah, but
Question.
unless you're going to pursue that and show that it's an objectionable feature, then
Okay.
I think it's going to be difficult to do.
Okay.
And I would have said it'd be difficult to do because there's so many of them. Steve?
In the zoning code, it talks about parking areas and parking lots. So for example, a driveway could be a parking area.
Oh.
In an R1, R2 zone where you can stack cars, you don't have to create a parking lot. Parking lot, in my mind, kicks in when the pavement requirement kicks in, which is 4 or more cars, or if it's in an actual commercial parking setting. So the zoning code does differentiate a little bit between single-family use, driveway, pavement, gravel, whatever you want to do. And then there are stricter requirements in the parking regulations in the zoning code that kick in when you go to 4 cars or when you go to a commercial parking lot.
So are you implying that we should change it from, then this is section B, that what we're looking at there, parking areas / lots, or just parking areas, or?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to do is maybe work toward a clarification about, does this really apply in a single-family residential setting? How much of it does? And then how much more expanded requirement do you need in a commercial setting?
What we were trying to do with 4 originally was, if you had a rental alongside what was a single-family residence, and that rental was required to put a parking lot in, as Steve just described it, then they would also be required to put in buffering as well. That was what we were trying to drive towards, the fact that we could have rentals with large with parking lots alongside family residences, and we probably ought to be requiring buffering for those areas. And that was where this wording about the single families and those with 3 or more unrelated adults came in. If you just delete that and leave it as between residential properties, but live with the fact that elsewhere in the code it explains what the difference is between a parking lot and the parking area, then I think we're safe, because here it simply talks about parking lots. And we would have had the opportunity to talk about parking areas if we wanted to. And the record, I guess, if this is ever recorded, will show that we didn't choose to do it.
Okay. There's a house on, I think it's corner of Arc and Lancaster there. Technically, it's all gravel. It's between 2 houses, all gravel. Technically, it's 2 parking areas, I think. You know what I'm talking about? The one with all the gravel?
Owned by the same person.
Owned by the same person. So they don't require a buffer.
Well, you gotta remember, that installation occurred before the landscape.
Oh, I know,
Yeah.
I know.
But using that as an example.
As an example.
Right.
Okay.
If somebody came in with a property that they built, or were in the process of building, then yeah, they would be allowed to do that, I guess, because it's not a parking lot.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of examples where it comes across.
Yeah, these are 2 parking areas that are just blended together, and you really can't tell
No.
which is which, and it's not paved either.
That's
It's
virtuous.
a big gravel, it's a gravel access with an easement across to another property, and then parking for 3 in gravel and parking for 3 more on the other lot in gravel.
And they paint the lines on the gravel so you can tell where everything is.
It's a real unusual circumstance, but a good one to use. Where do you want to draw the line?
Yeah.
Or where do you want to put the landscape buffer at?
And it's gravel, so it's probably permeable. Except it's been there for a couple of years and it's
Maybe compacted a bit now.
probably, yeah.
Compacted, yes. Okay.
Okay, no big deal.
Then on the last page, the law director has provided the wording he feels is necessary to make it clear that it's going to be the Office of Code Enforcement that's going to issue an order in this case, if any more effect.
Which is what has been happening, so.
Yeah, it's been happening, but you know, just felt that was probably the better way to do it.
So the law director was working on this.
The law director's read through it. He recommended
Definitions.
the definitions be included, and he gave us the wording to put in the penalties part to make it clear as to who is going to issue the order. He did point out that this part B of that is difficult to deal with because the courts require a separate filing for each day, and there doesn't seem to be any way around that at the moment.
Okay.
So we're at the stage now where it's being fine-tuned. I'm not sure it needs to be any more finer tuned than it is, because we know that when it moves to City Council, they will do what they like with it. I mean, we have no control at that point. We try and persuade them to not do too much with it. And so I guess at this point we need to decide whether we as a tree commission are happy with what we've got with these minor revisions and are prepared to ask our representative on council to move it forward.
I can try. I realize we're talking about 2 more meetings, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's
Yeah.
I think you did suggest that it might be useful just to inform council, you know, give them a first reading crack at this thing,
Okay.
and then come back in the new year with a
Okay.
new first reading.
I'll, go ahead.
If they're permeable to it.
Yes, I have a feeling the definitions will expand over time as well. Okay, I'll bring it up. I think there's a planning development committee, which would actually Debbie Phillips, but this would almost fall under planning development rather than environment, but I'll
When
get
is
a
that
copy.
meeting? Yeah.
I thought they were maybe talking about having one this Monday. I don't know. They're having a special session, but there were no committee meetings as of Tuesday planned, so I don't know if they decide to have one or not.
Okay.
I'll check.
What about the environment committee? Is that-
I didn't schedule one. Mostly because there was nothing on, right now we're just looking mostly at budget and and try to wrap it
No,
up.
this is more a way of sort of communicating to council that we're at the point now where we're ready
Okay.
to give them a little bit of extra notice that he's moving forward towards
Okay.
it.
We might want growth medium in there, however.
Yeah, well, it's got to start someplace, yes.
At what point will council reorder its committees and thereby give us a new representative on?
That will be the first meeting of January. I don't know what the date is, probably 6th, maybe? You'd have to look at a calendar. But it usually,
President signs.
what?
President council signs.
Yeah, President Council signs the committee structure, and then we announce it at the first meeting.
Okay.
And at that point, depending how they put it together, realize Environment Committee didn't exist earlier, and I think when Debbie was on I think it was in Planning Development at the time. I forget what committee she represented at the time.
Yeah, Jim Sands was the representative before
Okay.
Debbie.
Yeah. And that's it. This can fall under city services, or, it depends on what scope you're looking at.
Okay. And once we've got this one through, the next thing to do is look at Title 33, which is the one that set up
The Shade Tree Commission
Shade
itself.
Tree Commission,
Yeah.
and see what we want to do there, particularly in terms of trying to get people to not cut down trees, and when they do, have to pay a penalty.
Yes.
Yes.
I've emailed Gary Hunter twice about the tripling of the damages, and the implication I get is that we can probably do something like that. We just have to cite it, but there is a conflict with the general penalties, so we'll have to work that out.
Yeah.
I said the first two communications were unclear what was going on. It was the next one I think we're getting on target, so we'll have to have a few more pieces of correspondence before we get that.
I did get a copy of the book that Anne Bonner mentioned,
Mm.
and I borrowed it from the library. There's some good ideas in there
Mm.
in terms of penalties and how you can actually calculate things that are just, so these are ordinances that have been passed by other people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we can use those as a starting point, I think, for some of this. It did turn out that other people have not done, well, they've not done exactly what we're doing here, but there are other
Community cities.
communities
Mm.
that have got language in their the equivalent of a landscape ordinance, very similar to this, where you have percentages of coverage and things like that.
Mm.
And so we're not too far out in the front
No.
in what we're doing.
That's good. Okay.
Are there any
Title
other
33
comments?
next, okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments on Title 37 on the work? Emily, you have an inquiring look, no?
Have one suggestion.
Yes, Steve.
A while back, council wanted to have well, there is actually a Title 99 definitions, where a word that was used anywhere in the code, you went to Title 99 and this was the meaning of the word. But in a lot of cases, that really doesn't work. And if you look at the Ohio Revised Code, a lot of the sections start out with the definition section, because if you start to read it, you get clear to the end, you think you know what it said, and then all of a sudden they tell you, oh, the definition of that word is, you thought it was this. So they give you the definitions right up front, so you know that as you start through. I don't know about you, when I read things and the definitions are at the end, unless I really need to know, I don't read the definitions. Then I come to find out I've made a mistake as I've read it. So if you look at the Ohio Revised Code, that format is definitions first. Now, usually it's not it's not a real long list, but to me it really helps to read it that way. Here are the key. It's telling me what the key words are as I read, and I know those right up front. So I can't say at the end, oh, I didn't understand what that word meant, or you think it means something different than I think it means. So if the definition list isn't too long, I'd recommend put it right.
It's
At the
number
front.
2 on this one right now.
Yeah.
which is-
Yeah.
You're right.
Straight after the intent.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you may have told us this.
Yeah.
Thank you for reiterating. Yeah, and that's a good point. That's
If you get a chance, send me an electronic version of your latest here, and if I get a chance, I'll send it to Debbie Walker with the idea she can put copies in everybody's mailbox. I could copy this one, but I scribbled all over it.
Here are two, we have two extras, if this proposes, we have to
Okay, maybe
give,
Steve
we
would
get
like
to
one.
Steve and to,
For his leisure reading there.
yeah, some bedtime reading.
When I get home tonight.
If you're an insomniac, that'll take care of it.
Okay, maybe I'll just leave this in Debbie Walker's desk, unless you need it. Do you need it? No. Okay.
We all have one at this
Okay,
point.
Great.
Well, I think at this point we can probably speed through the rest of the agenda. We really don't have any more on the Emerald Ash Borer. Ann hasn't, we don't have any more data
On the
being
inventory?
processed or, no word. And, let's see, we have here the minutes moving around. So, while people are looking at the minutes to make sure everything's in there, I will point out that we have an event coming up. That is open house honoring Rick Abel for 12 years of service as mayor, and the tree commission is invited. So
It's December 11th.
Tuesday, December 11th, in the afternoon,
2 and
from
5,
2 to
just kind
5.
of drift in.
Okay.
Where is it?
Where's it going to be?
Here.
Right, okay. Oh, in this room, okay.
I had a question about the attendees. Lee, were you at the meeting
Last time?
You were, okay.
I don't remember if I was.
Okay.
You weren't. You weren't.
No, I don't think I was, because it's
You were.
about a week before the election. I think I was busy.
I wasn't sure I'd got.
Yeah, mark down, Mark Tardy.
I was tardy. I thought I was on time.
And is it really an Aleanthus that's at the back of the...
It's growing in close conjunction with the box elder. So, we increased the number of trees to 14 for the fall planting. So,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Today's the 6th, isn't it?
yeah, indeed it is.
Okay. I see you were planning next meeting on the 5th.
Oh,
All right.
That's okay. I thought I lost a day or something.
That's me. No, I had a lot of problems trying to put these minutes together.
let's see, and there was something on the front yard gardening and invasive. Oh, good, we've got Lee's providing information to the code office on
I think it was supposed to be on noxious species rather than on invasive.
noxious.
Okay.
Actually, noxious weeds, I think is what it was. But
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you for all that.
Okay, would somebody move to accept the minutes as amended?
I move to accept the minutes as amended.
Greg moves, and
I second.
Lee and Emily seconds. All in favor? Aye. And they're accepted as amended. Our next meeting will be the first Thursday of the month again, January 3, 7 p.m., City Council Chambers. I'll ask Debbie to book that for us.
Okay.
And we do seem to have that pretty firmly in our possession the first Thursday evening.
Works.
And is there any other business? Is there any other? We're smiling,
I
too.
noticed that you talked about the minutes of the last meeting in reference to front yard gardening and weeds and that kind of thing. I don't know if you noticed in the Monday edition of the A News, there's a little article
Yes.
about one of my, my most recent investigation and attempt to interpret code and what is and is not permitted. So I would appreciate, any input you might have on that. I'm doing research now. Sacramento, California is a real good example of front yard gardening. it's really environmentally a hot topic these days because of kind of resurgence of victory gardens, growing your own produce, organic growing, limiting application of pesticides, fertilizers, fungicides, those kinds of things. I don't know if it reduces the amount of watering
Yes,
you might
it
have
does.
to do.
You can design the landscape to reduce the amount of water you're going to use compared to grass.
So I would appreciate any kind of input you might
Yeah.
have. I'm getting all kinds of,
Yeah, I've been in
Opinions.
touch with some people, and I have some information for you, but it disappeared right before I came here. Yeah, but I've been working on that for you.
okay. Just so you know, too, I've been getting comments both ways. There are some people that don't want to see gardening in the front yard.
I think I've been getting a few of those too.
They want to see trees and shrubbery and grass and maybe flowers, but not vegetables.
Or now, some front yard gardens are flower gardens.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not so much, they don't object to that, but, you know,
Well,
if you're
you
going to allow
say-
somebody to grow tomatoes in the front yard, my next door neighbor might be able to grow tomatoes or corn or squash and if they can do it next door, well, they can do it in that part of town and in that part of town. So it's really kind of I'm not going to say a real fine line, but people are going to watch real closely. If this, there's some legislation that comes to pass about front yard gardening, there's going to be a lot of
So,
discussion about
When you
it.
say front yard gardening, what you're really thinking is vegetable gardening. Is that what you're thinking?
No,
Because-
I'm thinking about myself personally. I'm thinking about a combination of, like at my house, I have flowers with vegetables, and I try to keep a good mix because they complement each other, and they help each other out essentially too.
And in many botanical gardens, they are growing vegetables as ornamentals, not, the cafeteria isn't coming in harvesting them, as far as I know, but they're part of the floral arrangement, so.
You see, to go back to our earlier discussion about buffering, look at some European countries and what they do in terms of front yard gardening, if you like. Those gardens are normally bordered either with fences or walls or hedges, and so you don't see
Right.
what is actually in that garden unless they deliberately display it to you. And so it's a completely different design concept than the sort of large open space, continuous space that you see from many American.
It reminds
There's
me
a
of,
California gardening author who's written a whole book on including food plants in the landscape. And she has pictures of her yard where she's done it beautifully.
Yes,
And you have to, when you talk about food plants, what's a food plant? Well, there's all sorts of them. It's a
Right.
cardoon, and is that a food plant or is that an ornamental plant?
And if you can't have vegetables in your front yard, does that eliminate growing ornamental kale?
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
and what about car gardens?
Car garden.
A good healthy crop of Fords.
Right.
If you might
Or
consider
mixed.
that a front yard garden would have to be screened and fence was an option. You got to remember, and that's another part of this article too, is fences are not permitted in front yards. But I'll give you a good example that doesn't really bother me every day when I drive by it going to work. At the corner of the stop sign when you're coming down 2nd Street before you head down the hill, that first Elizabeth. At the corner of 2nd Elizabeth, there's a front yard garden, and it's a combination of vegetables and flowers, and there's a little picket fence, a little square that was meant to either keep something in or keep something out. And I didn't really look at that as a front yard fence violation, but it's an example of what you might want to consider for screening purposes. If it's fairly low, it's not up where you can't see across the front, or it's going to create some kind of thing where not only is the garden right there, but so is the attack dog right at the sidewalk. Don't want that either. So just something to think about, because if you're going to require bushes or hedges, that's going to take quite a while. And a student, let's say, who might want to, like up on Lancaster Street, plant a garden in the front yard, will do that, but they're not really inclined to plant the shrubbery.
I think one of the objections on the one in Lancaster is that when a garden becomes fallow, dead tomato plants tied to stakes, and there's always the possibility of erosion too. I mean, if you've already turned the soil over and everything's just
Exactly.
sitting there and it starts to rain and snow, you're going to have, it's going to be running into the street. I mean, it's almost static.
There are ways of handling that, like you plant winter rye,
Mhm.
so it holds,
you
holds the
have to mow it.
soil and what?
And then we come to mowing.
And then you go out with scissors and to keep it. What was that about front yard fences? I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, this is down on Maplewood and Watt. I don't know how Nick Clausen was able to combine the two, a story about front yard fences and a story about front yard gardening, but,
Front yard.
What are the restrictions
Yeah,
on?
what?
oh, on fences? No
Fences.
fences permitted
In front setback.
in the front setback
Oh.
at all, no matter what the height.
So if it's
Terrace
a-
walls are allowed. There's some combinations of terraces and stoops between 3 feet, in some instances up to 6. Like if you had an excavated front, your house was down, you could have a 6-foot wall, but it wouldn't be above grade.
Yeah.
But fences are completely prohibited in the area between, essentially, let's just, I won't get into real specifics, but between the house and the street.
Oh, really?
You can have a
So a
fence.
5-foot fence that went across the property is not permitted, actually?
Permitted in some
Across the
zones,
front.
isn't it, though?
What's that?
It's permitted in some zones, isn't it, or no?
In residential zone, it's not. What it is, it's a function of the front setback. Some zones don't have a front setback,
Yeah.
but in residential zones, there's a 25-foot front setback.
So that eliminates most of the front yard. I mean, if you had a 50-foot front setback, you could put a fence 25 feet away. I mean, if you had a 50-foot front yard, you know, and your setback's 25 feet in, then you have room to put a fence
In
in.
other words, it's,
But
it's
the
a-
setback, you mean the easement?
no,
No?
no. What this
Unless
is,
it-
it's a design standard that's being imposed on residential areas in saying that for that 25 feet, you can't put a fence in there at all.
Okay.
Beyond the 25 feet, you can put a fence there,
Okay.
and build a wall, whatever you want to do. But,
Okay.
but it is a aesthetic design standard
Okay.
that they're imposing.
Aesthetics, that's the
Yes,
word that's involved in
that's
all
what
of
it's for.
this.
Yeah.
It's the aesthetics
Yeah.
that makes it so difficult to grapple with.
Yeah, if your house, like you said, if your house is 100 feet off the road, you only have to go back 25 feet from your front property line, that's the setback, and then you can build a fence. But in a lot of settings, because a lot of the residential settings are not rural residential in this area, South End is more rural residential, but close in, most houses aren't even built far enough back. Anything built before 1960 is probably too close.
Yes.
And so essentially, you've eliminated that whole
Yeah.
area. But
You
then
can-
what do you do? If you want to screen something from your neighbor, or you want to add an architectural feature to landscaping that's not objectionable, well, local regulations say you can't do that.
You go in front of the zoning board of appeals at that point.
Or the city council.
Well, you might.
City
yeah.
council's right away,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
City
actually.
council and the right. There's
Yeah.
a difference between the setback and the street right
Yeah,
away.
if you get close enough, you've got to have a revocable license.
Is that something that perhaps the city should revisit? Because there can be very attractive picket fences or Victorian iron fences. And
Yeah, the zoning code, there are 3 different ways to amend the zoning code. A citizen or a group can initiate it. The planning commission can initiate it, or city council can initiate it. The process is it's first looked at by the planning commission, and a recommendation then sent to city council to revise the code. That's how the zoning code works. So anybody could come to the planning commission, or the planning commission on its own initiative could bring it up. And that's how the zoning code works for every revision. Anybody can bring it up, but then there's a process it goes through.
it seems to me that this is part of the 19th century idea of having all of the front yards being one extensive
Oh,
parking area, which I think is really rather out of date.
Yeah. And that's, well, people are going back to not wanting to think that way. I keep thinking about the commercial, I don't know how many times you see it, I seem to see it every morning, about the white picket fence in the front yard and the 2.4 children. It's an Ameriprise commercial, I think. But I think more that way, and you probably do too. What's wrong with a little white picket
Yeah.
fence? It's the American dream. And what does it hurt?
Good fences make good neighbors. Well,
So you might be right, it might be a 60s type
Well, I'm thinking-
mentality that
I'm
just is
thinking
reflected in the
about,
code.
Mid-19th century when this really came in.
Right. Well, I'm just saying, I'm thinking about when did everybody want to see like a football field continuous in front of all, everybody's house? Too, when did that come in? So I like fences myself.
And we have quite a few in the city, considering it supposedly is a violation, but many of them predate it, and some of them got.
and you can grow your own, too. So, well, I don't think are there any other comments on, we were just about at the point of having too much fun again. And so it's
Time to adjourn, is that what you're
time to
saying?
adjourn, yes. So thank you all.